Okay. Hi, Senator. I'm so excited to chat with you today. And I'm glad that you were able to find some time. I know you're really busy. Um, I thought maybe we could start off by you telling us a little bit about what you do and and yeah, why that's important for young Canadians to know about.
Okay. Well, first of all, please just call me Kim. And I'm very happy that you invited me to do this. And thank you very much. And if ever anybody who's in a public service position like mine says they're too busy to connect with people, then we deserve to be held accountable. Yeah, because the reason I'm busy is I think it's important that I do my job, and part of my job is to represent those people whose voices often don't get to be in Parliament, and that includes, unfortunately, too many young people and too many people who are relegated to the margins, who are marginalized, whether it's economically, racially, by gender, by ability, all of those things. So yeah, in terms of what I do, the job of a senator is basically to be in the second chamber. It's a bicameral parliament, which means we have two chambers: the House of Commons, where they're elected, and the Senate is the body that I'm part of, which is appointed. It's often referred to as the chamber of sober second thought. So, you know, the what the elected officials come up with and what they campaign on is often what they present in Parliament. And part of our role is to look at the legislation, to look at what's being proposed and suggest improvements, and in particular to think about regional issues, but also to think about the issues of those voices who aren't otherwise there. Because we're not elected, I see and a lot of us feel very strongly that issue of representing minority interests, as it's termed, is really vitally important. Because if those individuals don't have a voice because they're not seen as sufficiently influential to the elected body, then it's really important that we include those. So it includes obviously reviewing legislation. Just before this, I was in a committee meeting, the Aboriginal Peoples Committee, where we're considering Bill C-15, the UN Declaration that's introducing the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People into law in Canada. I also was this morning assisting a man who was going for parole, because I still keep contact because of the work I've done for 40 years around the criminal legal system. And so and then after this, I'm talking to a number of BC interns at the BC legislature. And so, and then I'll be back in the Aboriginal Peoples Committee. And then later on, I have some calls with folks who want to ensure we understand some of the issues around the UN Declaration, as well as some of my colleagues around the work we're doing on diversity work within the Senate, anti-racism work, and some work we're doing around trying to get some additional changes to the criminal legal system. And then over top of that, I'm always focused, because my long-term interest is on building a robust economic, social, and health safety net for Canada. Some would say we've had it and it's gone. Some would say we never had it. I don't really even want to get into that debate. I know we need things like a guaranteed livable income. We don't need inadequate social assistance. We need to have ways for people to be able to take sick leave if they need to, whether or not they have paid sick leave, and guaranteed livable income provides that. We need ways for people to be able to take care of their family members, whether it's children, elderly people, people with disabilities, or take care of themselves when they need a break from work or school or whatever it is. And so guaranteed livable income provides that. In addition, it's, that may or may not be something that dovetails with reforms to things like the employment assistance provisions. And in addition, I think we need tax reform. The Law Commission we've just been told in the budget that the Law Commission will be reinvigorated. And I think in addition to looking at criminal law issues, it should be looking at tax law issues, and that we should be looking more at a more equitable tax system. So in the end, what that means in the time that I'm in the Senate, if I don't cark it or quit before, I'm here until I turn 75, which is another, what are we at now, 14 years. 14 years and a bit. And so that means that I have a responsibility to make sure that we have things like pharmacare, dental care, mental health care, guaranteed livable income, and things like free post-secondary education, as well as doing all of that within a sustainable development context that doesn't harm our planet more, that ensures we get rid of boil water advisories in all communities, particularly Indigenous communities, and that we move forward in a way that leaves the planet in a better place than where it is right now.
So a lot of what you just said is stuff that I care so much about. And it's stuff that I know our growing community of followers care about as well. But it's also not a lot of the stuff that we're seeing reflected in mainstream discussions around like politics and government. And this is sort of a weird time because we're in the middle of a global pandemic, but all of those things that you mentioned, especially the guaranteed livable income and everything associated with that, would make mitigating this pandemic and navigating it a lot less messed up and a lot more equitable. Why aren't these things that we're seeing happening in conversations more publicly at different levels, like in the media, in the representatives we elect?
Mm-hmm. Well, that's a good question. I mean, a very simple, one simple reason I think is if you've never experienced it, you may not understand it. And there are a lot of people with a lot of privilege in these positions. The fact that I grew up working class, that I know very well in my own family the challenges of homelessness, of people challenged with mental health issues. And it's not that people who have money don't have those experiences, but if you have a lot of resources, you're less likely to see someone end up homeless or struggling without their medication or not being able to access treatment if you've got the money to be able to buy it. And I think that part of the reason 1 in 7 or 1 in 10, depending on which poverty measure you use, people in this country have been left behind, even with all the incredible benefits that have been put in place by the government, is that, we've focused on workers. Like we've valued people who are working, not all in the same way, but we haven't necessarily valued the people who have been, are struggling with real day-to-day poverty before this. So the focus on the middle class and people aspiring to the middle class is great. But what about the people who have been so plunged into poverty and into marginalized existence that their ability to get to even, contemplating moving into being able to work, to have access to supports, to have housing is a challenge. And so I think that's part of the reason is there's a big gap. The fact that we had during this pandemic, you may have heard me talk about it on, some of the lives I've done before, but, during this pandemic, within the shadow of the Parliament buildings, and I'm right across the street from Centre Block, in the shadow of the Parliament buildings, we have had people, women, particularly racialized women, working full-time jobs for minimum wages who can't afford to rent an apartment in this city, in Ottawa. And so the fact that that is true in 90% of the communities in this country is egregious. And we had a doctor who does incredible work with homeless people in this community courageously acknowledge that he hadn't realized that. He didn't realize people who are working minimum wage jobs full time can't afford to rent an apartment and are living in homeless shelters. So I think a lot of times people don't know. And these aren't the folks who the government is going, if you're homeless, it's not who's being lobbied for at election time. And so, even though it's a huge issue and poverty costs us huge amounts of money, it's a huge human cost as well, but also financially, it costs a lot to keep people in poverty in terms of the costs to the healthcare system, having to shore up things like shelters without having long-term strategies. It actually costs more than if we invested early on in these approaches. So I think part of it is ensuring that people understand what the issues are and demanding that we have a moral responsibility to look at economic growth in ways that really look at human well-being, not just GDP.
Mm-hmm. And you've kind of touched on this a little bit just now around like these aren't the people lobbying, and you said earlier like they are not sufficiently relevant, or you phrased it really well. What does that really mean? Like, what's the plain language around?
Well, I mean, yeah.
No, that, yeah.
No, sorry to interrupt you. It means and it's not the people's opinion who they're looking for. And that's really why, when my colleague, Mary Lou McFedrin, brought forth the bill to lower the voting age to 16, and people are going, oh, they'll be irresponsible. It's your future. I'm not saying you're 16, but you're a lot, you're more than half my age. But, the reality is it's young people, it's your future, and we should be building a better future. And, everybody's concerned about long-term care. And I am too. My mom died in long-term care during this pandemic. It's awful, the conditions. But, why are we focused? Because we're all getting old. But, we also need to focus. Childcare is great. But if you're poor, $10 a day childcare is still maybe out of reach. And so we need to actually ensure that, this is an issue that the government recognizes people who may already be in the middle classes also are concerned about. And so I'm hoping that raising this issue and, things like the work that you're doing in your groups will mean that people will raise the issue. Because I think right now, people don't see it as, that's not who's voting, that's not who's paying taxes. So we don't, quite frankly, the worst case scenario is maybe they don't care. But I think when people know they care, I think a big part of it is, it's out of sight, out of mind, or you see someone homeless and you don't think much about it. You think, oh, there's a shelter or somebody taking care of that issue. Not that, we have a responsibility to do something different. So we don't have, it's in my lifetime that we've seen people begging on the streets in Canada. I'm not saying we never, ever saw it, but not like we see it now. My children are your age and younger. My son is 30 and my daughter is 22. And, in their lifetimes, they have never known a situation where you don't see people begging in the street. I remember the first time I saw someone walking into traffic. It was in the United States to get money. Now we see it all the time in this city and most cities in this country. And that's atrocious. We should have way better supports in place so that people aren't in the dire circumstances they are.
I think a lot of times when those type of conversations come up, and it's not my opinion, but like you hear a lot of people saying like, why should we put money? Like like it's pie. So like the money could be going towards things that immediately benefit me and people like me, or money could be going towards a community of insert every stereotype they have around that marginalized community, off like not fair stereotypes, but just that's how people look at it. And then I think it gives us permission to like dismiss it as not important. What like you kind of touched on this earlier, and you were saying that it makes more sense financially to do something about these issues.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's always amazed me. This is a good question for you to ask you tell me how this happens, because I know that there is no end of money available. Until recently, questioning how much money is put into policing and corrections and and courts and all of that is almost never questioned. We don't say, oh, the judges can't send people to jail this week because the jails are full. We don't say, oh, we shouldn't send people with mental health issues to prison, because actually they're just going to get worse, and it's going to be harder for them and for all the community when they come back into the community. So really they don't fit the mandate. So let's not send them there. We don't do that. If any other system failed as much as our social assistance schemes, our prison systems, our criminal legal system, if the education system pumped out, everybody failing, we'd probably want to revamp it. And so the reality is, I think that we don't question the amount of money we already pump into these issues in ways that are not productive. And that's really what the question that I always ask is, how does nobody ever ask, why are we spending multiple billion, tens of billions of dollars a year on courts, cops, and corrections, and the crime rates are going down, and we're seeing it's mostly people who are most marginalized who end up in the prison system. Mm-hmm. It's not the people necessarily who are causing the greatest harm. So how do we rationalize that? That's my question, is why don't people question that and say, is it just that, okay, well, they must deserve it, and I guess we just have to pay for it? Well, if that's our attitude, let's invest in a way that will actually bring those financial costs, but in my humble opinion, more importantly, the human costs of that down, and prevent it from happening. It's costs a minimum in the cheapest jails in this country, $30,000 to $50,000 a year to keep someone in. And in those jails, it would be like local lockups and things, up to $500,000 a year. And sometimes people are in for very minor things, or because they're a nuisance, or because they have mental health issues. And think about what we could fund in terms of mental health supports for everybody, not just those individuals, if we invested those resources differently. That's why I'm, supporting one of my colleagues, Senator Boniface, who used to be the head of the OPP, the police, Ontario Police Force. And she's brought in a bill to decriminalize drugs, because in Portugal, when they decriminalized drugs, they took all that money they were using on policing and corrections and put it into supports, including housing, but also treatment supports for people. And guess what? Fewer people are in jail, fewer people are using drugs, and more people are, have their needs met. So why wouldn't we want to move to that system?
It's such a cool case study, and what can be done if you reallocate money and value that human cost so much more than it is right now being like looked at and dealt with. And so I think all of this fires me up, and I know it fires up my audience and what they think about, because I see the comments. I know they care about these things. Where we hit a barrier is actually knowing what to do next. Because when I email my elected official, if I'm emailing with something that they have not agreed with in the past, they just kind of dismiss me. Or in this particular situation, I don't get a response at all. And it makes me feel not valued. It makes me feel like my voice doesn't matter, but it also makes me feel like what I'm saying doesn't matter. And what's the point of sending these emails and tweeting at them and trying to call them if I'm going to get some roundabout political BS answer to the issues that I care about?
Well, I can't even imagine how frustrating it is. I know I've faced that. Before I was in this position, I was doing that as well. And it's very frustrating to have people, literally, or figuratively pat you on the head and say, go away. But I do think it's the volume as well as who's doing it. So I think it's unfair and inappropriate that young people get dismissed. I think it's unfair and inappropriate that people who are not part of their main electorate, the people who elected them, don't get treated in the same way. I try to respond to all my emails. I must say, though, when we get group emails, like if you send out a mass email, there's spam filters and things. So, if people are sending out mass ones, they probably don't get a response from me other than just a generic thing saying, thanks for writing. But I do think it is important to keep up and to remind them, like, this is the second or third or fourth or fifth time that I've tried to contact you and you just ignore, and maybe even tweeting that. I mean, the reality is if people aren't responding and they're your elected representative, how else do you get it brought forward? And that's part of their job, as far as I'm concerned. And the bigger, the challenge right now for me personally is how many people are sending things. And, because the mail is only delivered, I'm in my office right now, but the mail is only delivered twice a week. And, we've got a pile of correspondence going. So I worry about who I'm ignoring right now. And I, not because I'm intending to ignore them, but because we haven't got to it and because of the delay. But I do think it is really important for your voices to be out there. I think this is the work you're doing. I mean, it's the interns and the young people who have worked with us in our office who got me doing all this social media. I'm a total techno twit. My kids know, like, what you're on. Although Facebook, I guess, is now just for the old folks like me. But, that's how I got on Instagram. Ray Cash, who was an intern with us a few years ago, got me doing our appointed podcasts. And so we do that. And then Virginia's been doing it. And now Femi's going to be picking it up. And then the TikToks was, my daughter said, you've got to, like, the only other politician in Canada who's on TikTok is Jagmeet Singh. And, so I'm like, oh, good Lord. Well, I said some other things too, but, I don't fortunately we have, professional help in the sense that Maggie, who's the other young woman who's working on those, Maggie and Madison know what they're doing. I don't. They'll say, and I can't even keep track of stuff sometimes. And they'll say, this is what you're being asked. And so I'll send a message and they can post things for me. But, it's you guys who are showing me how to try and get some of these messages out. So I think it's really important that you keep engaging and don't take no for an answer. And I don't like saying that because I don't want people to get demoralized by having to keep doing it. And it's not like it's only your responsibility. Of course, elected officials and senators, for that matter, should be responding. But if they're not, I say stick with it and keep, challenging us. If we're not responding, then, we should be. We're public servants. That means in the service to the public, not, doing whatever we feel like whenever we feel like it.
And I'm mindful of our time together. So I'm going to ask you one last question, something our team has been talking about a lot. And we touched on this through this whole thing, is this concept of what is the statement like the personal is the political, and why is it important to have, to advocate, to be political? Like what does that mean? And to you, I guess, and how do you think young people should engage with that kind of concept?
I love the personal is political as a concept because for me, what it means, what it's meant my whole life working is, in fact, we just did a TikTok. We just filmed a TikTok about this. Is all my life I've been told, oh, you work so hard, you're going to burn out. And for me, what gives, for whatever strength the arguments I have, they're all strengthened by the fact that it's based in people's reality. Sometimes it's my own, sometimes it's my family, but it's always people I know and love who have experienced, horrible discrimination, horrible disadvantage, and horrible marginalization. And so the activism and the advocacy and the legislative work that I do is always rooted in those realities. And for me, that's what the personal is political means, is that, if I get strength from that, in the sense that when everybody else is telling me that's a dumb idea, Kim, or, what are you thinking? Like, for instance, guaranteed livable income. When I first arrived in the Senate, that was completely that was what the people who knew me said to me to convince me to allow my name to stand, because I didn't think I'd ever get picked. And but that you can work on long-term issues. And that's what I thought immediately. And when I wanted to do my first speech on that, people said, that people might tune out and think, you're like pie in the sky off with the fairies sort of thing. And so I said, okay, so I focus on some, the overrepresentation of Indigenous women in prison, which is also a really important issue and a subset of that. But then then I thought, okay, I've been here 3 years and now I better start talking about what I really came here to do. And so ironically, it was February, just 3 weeks before the pandemic was declared, I launched what's called an inquiry in the Senate. And it was to say, look, this is a long-term idea that not just me, because none of us does anything alone, but a whole bunch of us think is a really good way to go. And then the pandemic hit, and then suddenly it's an issue that a lot of people are really interested in discussing. And so I think it's also, personal is political is also about, for me, developing collectivity, that I connect with people over issues and shared concerns about things and wanting to change things. I may be the more visible face sometimes, but nothing I'm doing am I doing alone. It's always with a collectivity that's interested. So for me, that's to try and be a bit more succinct. The personal is political means that it's not just that it's an issue that I think of out of the blue. It's something that's grounded in people's realities, not always my own, but certainly people who I know and work with. And so the solutions, if you will, or the movement forward or the ideas are all ones about addressing that issue. And so that's for me what it means. And it also means it keeps you energized, because when you're really interested in something, It's, I think it's why I haven't, people keep saying you're going to burn out. I mean, if I was working on something I wasn't interested in, maybe I would burn out because I wouldn't want to work 15, 20 hours a day on something I wasn't interested in. But when it's something that's vital, it energizes you as well to move on it.
Well, thank you so much for your time and for your insight and for the work you're doing. I'll be honest, I never really paid attention to the Senate until I came across your work.
Yeah.
And by your work, I mean your TikToks. So,
Yeah.
and now I'm paying more attention because of that, because now I feel engaged and because I feel like, oh, it's not this like mythical, difficult area. So thank you for doing that. And thanks for chatting with me today. This was so great.
Oh, you're very kind and generous, and thank you. And that's exactly how they convinced me to do it. They said, a lot of young people don't know, and the Senate is old, male, pale, and stale, and I think that's true. And so we should be responsive. And so, if people want more information, there is a bio page that you can go to and see all the work and things that we're working on. So feel free to do that. So thank you very much, and thank you for your leadership.
Thanks so much. Take care.